My name is Samuel Harrow. I'm 72 years old, and I've been carrying a secret that's been eating me alive for 35 years. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect understanding. But before they come for me, before this all ends the way I know it will, someone needs to hear what really happened out there on the water that night. I found something that wasn't supposed to exist, and I made a choice that changed everything. They're going to call me a criminal, a traitor maybe, but I saved a life. I saved her. And I'd do it again, even knowing what it cost me, even knowing what's coming. The camera recording is grainy, dated April 2023. The old man's hands shake as he adjusts the lens. Behind him, through a salt-stained window, the Pacific Ocean stretches gray and infinite. Samuel Harrow had been a fisherman for 47 years when his life fractured into before and after. The coastal village of Anchor's End, Oregon, knew him as a quiet man who kept to himself, who rose before dawn and returned after dusk, his boat cutting through fog like a ghost ship, his shack perched on weathered stilts at the edge of a rocky inlet, a structure so unremarkable that most people forgot it existed at all. But beneath that shack, in a space hollowed out from stone and darkness, something impossible had been living, breathing, waiting. The Navy discovered it by accident, which is perhaps the only reason Samuel made it to 72. A routine coastal survey using new sonar technology picked up an anomaly, a thermal signature that didn't match any known marine life. When the divers went down, they found the hidden chamber, and when they opened it, they found her. Samuel's journal, recovered from his kitchen table, begins in October 1988. The first entry is simple, almost mundane. Caught something in the nets today, not a fish. He had been 20 miles offshore when it happened. The nets had snagged on something heavy, something that fought with an intelligence that made his blood run cold. Most fishermen would have cut the line. Samuel almost did. But something, some instinct he couldn't name, made him haul it up instead. She came up tangled in rope and kelp, thrashing, her eyes, God, those eyes, wide with terror and too aware, too human, for what the rest of her appeared to be. Her upper body resembled a woman, pale skin mottled with patterns like sun through water, dark hair plastered to angular shoulders. But where legs should have been, a powerful tail twisted, scaled in colors that shifted between deep green and silver. Samuel had cut the engine. The sea had gone quiet except for her gasping, a sound halfway between drowning and weeping. I thought I was losing my mind. Samuel's voice continues on the tape, steadier now, lost in memory. I'd heard the stories every fisherman has, sailors' tales, myths, warnings carved into driftwood in bars up and down the coast. But seeing her there, bleeding from the ropes, looking at me like she knew I held her life in my hands. Nothing prepares you for that. He'd made his choice in seconds. Instead of throwing her back or calling it in, he'd wrapped her in wet canvas, radioed that he was coming in with engine trouble, and taken her home. To the shack, to the secret chamber beneath it that had once been used by smugglers during Prohibition. A space his grandfather had shown him as a child, accessible only through a hidden floor panel and a narrow shaft. The first night he'd sat by the opening, listening to her move in the water he'd flooded the chamber with, using a pump and hose run down from his shack. He didn't sleep. He couldn't. He'd crossed a line, and there was no going back. I told myself it was temporary, Samuel says, his eyes distant, just until I figured out what to do, until she healed. That's what I told myself the first week, the first month, the first year. But years became decades, and the secret grew roots. The chamber beneath Samuel's shack was roughly 15 feet in diameter, carved into the rock by hands long dead. The smugglers had used it to store rum and whiskey, had built a clever system that allowed seawater to flow in through hidden channels while keeping the space sealed from above. Samuel had expanded it, carefully, over months and years, using tools and working only at night. He'd installed lights, dim and blue, like Deepwater, a filtration system repurposed from aquarium equipment, temperature regulators. Over time, the chamber became something between a cave and a sanctuary, a pocket of ocean trapped beneath land. Samuel's journal entries from those early years are sparse, clinical almost, as if emotion was too dangerous to commit to paper. Day 47. The wound on her tail has closed. She ate today, raw mackerel, watched me the entire time. Day 93. She made a sound, like singing but older. It made my teeth ache. The fisherman established a routine that would define the next 3.5 decades. Before dawn, he'd check on her, lowering food and fresh seawater. During the day, he'd fish, maintaining his reputation as a reliable, if unremarkable, workman of the sea. After dark, he'd spend hours by the chamber, sometimes talking, sometimes sitting in silence. I named her Mira, Samuel says on the tape, and for the first time, his voice cracks. She never told me her real name. Maybe she couldn't, or maybe it was something my throat couldn't shape. But Mira, it means ocean, in some language I read about. It felt right. Communication came slowly, built on gestures and patience. She was intelligent. That much became clear within weeks. She understood patterns, routines. When Samuel was injured, a fishing knife slipping and opening his palm, she'd pressed her hand against the chamber's thick glass wall in what could only be concern. By the second year, they'd developed something like language, taps on the glass, drawn symbols in the condensation. She'd sketch images of the deep ocean, of others like her, of places that existed in crushing darkness where light never reached. Samuel would show her books, photographs from National Geographic, maps of the world above the waterline. She learned to read, Samuel continues, a ghost of wonder in his weathered voice. Took her 3 years, but she learned. I'd hold up newspapers, magazines, and she'd study them for hours. I think she knew more about the human world than most humans by the end. But there was loneliness in that chamber, a solitude that Samuel couldn't fix. Sometimes he'd wake to strange songs drifting up through the floor, melodies that made him dream of drowned cities and trenches that plunged into the earth's core. Sometimes he'd find her pressed against the glass, staring at nothing, and he'd know she was remembering what she'd lost. The village noticed nothing. Samuel had always been alone, always been strained. If he spent his money on equipment and electricity, if his shack ran generators at odd hours, who cared? Fishermen were eccentric by nature. The sea made you that way. There were close calls. A tsunami warning in 1995 that sent officials door to door, urging evacuation. Samuel had refused to leave, had stood on his porch with a shotgun until they'd given up. A curious marine biologist in 2003 asking to rent his property for a coastal study. Samuel had doubled his price until the man went elsewhere. Every year I thought it would be the last, Samuel says. Every year I told myself I'd find a way to get her back to the ocean, back to wherever she came from. But how? She couldn't survive in the shallows. Too many boats, too many people. And the deep ocean, I had no way to reach it, no way to get her there without being seen. His journal from year 20 shows the strain. I'm 58 today. My back hurts. Hands shake. How much longer can I do this? How much longer can she survive down there? Sometimes I think I saved her life just to trap her in a beautiful prison. But there were moments of strange joy, too, documented in faded Polaroids Samuel kept hidden in a tackle box. Pictures of Mira pressing her face to the glass, her expression curious. Images of shells and stones Samuel had brought her, arranged in patterns on the chamber floor. The end began, as endings often do, with something small, a leak in the filtration system that Samuel, at 72, couldn't fix as quickly as he once could. The leak caused a pressure change. The pressure change triggered an alarm on the new coastal monitoring system the Navy had installed 3 miles offshore, part of a submarine detection grid upgraded after growing tensions in the Pacific. Samuel didn't know about the alarm. Didn't know that somewhere in a facility in San Diego, a junior officer was staring at a screen showing an unexplained thermal signature near Anchor's End, Oregon. Didn't know that the signature was too large for a seal, too warm for a cache of illegal goods, too persistent to ignore. March 13th, 2023. Samuel's journal entry reads, the handwriting shakier than in earlier years. Saw a Navy vessel offshore today? Probably nothing. Been seeing them more lately. Coast Guard, too. They're looking for something. God help me if it's her. The investigation began quietly. The Navy sent Lieutenant Commander Jessica Torres and a small team to Anchor's End under the guise of a routine environmental survey. Torres was 36, sharp, and had spent 8 years in naval intelligence before requesting a transfer to research operations. She'd seen too many real threats to dismiss anomalies. Her first impression of Samuel Harrow was documented in her official report. Subject appears to be a typical elderly fisherman, cooperative but guarded. Physical condition suggests years of manual labor. No obvious signs of illness or instability. Property is isolated but well maintained. Subject became notably tense when asked about underwater structures in the area. Torres had pressed gently at first. "We're mapping the coastal shelf, Mr. Harrow. Old smuggler caves, natural formations, anything that might explain some readings we're getting. You've been here longer than anyone. You'd know if there was anything unusual underneath the surface." Samuel had looked at her with eyes that had seen decades of sunrises over water and said simply, "Nothing unusual, just rock and tide pools far as I know." But Torres hadn't become lieutenant commander by accepting first answers. She'd noticed the generators, had noted the electrical usage far beyond what a simple fishing shack required. She'd seen how Samuel positioned himself between her team and his property, a subtle body language of protection. "Request permission to conduct a sonar sweep of the immediate coastal area," she'd written in her log. "Subject's behavior warrants further investigation." The sweep happened 3 days later, at dawn, using portable equipment. Torres and her team had anchored 50 yards from Samuel's shack while he watched from his porch, coffee cup frozen halfway to his lips. The sonar painted a picture that made Torres's pulse quicken. A chamber, definitely artificial, approximately 15 feet in diameter and 12 feet deep, hollowed into the rock directly beneath Harrow's property. And inside the chamber, something alive, something with a heat signature and mass consistent with a large marine mammal. Or, "We need to see what's under your shack, Mr. Harrow," Torres had said, standing on his porch 20 minutes later, 2 armed sailors behind her. Her voice had been firm but not unkind. "This isn't a request." Samuel's journal entry for that day is a single line: "They know." The tape shows Samuel pausing here, his hand covering his mouth. When he continues, his voice is barely a whisper. "I asked for 1 hour. 1 hour to go down there alone, to explain to her what was happening. Torres, she was decent about it. She could have said no, could have arrested me right there. But something in my face, I think she saw something that made her human. She gave me 30 minutes. Those 30 minutes are not recorded anywhere except in Samuel's memory and whatever Mira carried away from that final meeting." He'd descended through the floor panel for the last time, lowering himself into the blue-lit chamber where he'd spent more hours than he'd spent anywhere else over 35 years. Mira had been waiting, pressed against the far wall, her eyes, those impossibly large, dark eyes reflecting the lights like tide pools full of stars. She'd known. Somehow she'd known. "I told her I was sorry," Samuel says on the tape, tears now running freely down his weathered face. "Sorry I couldn't get her home. Sorry I'd kept her trapped all these years. Sorry that they were coming and I couldn't stop them." He'd pressed his hand to the glass one final time. She'd matched it, palm to palm, with only the barrier between them. Then the floor above had shook with boots, and voices had called down, and Samuel Harrow had climbed up to face the consequences of 35 years of impossible choices. The Navy team descended into the chamber with weapons drawn and cameras rolling. The footage, later classified and leaked only in fragments, shows the moment humanity confirmed what legends had whispered for millennia. Lieutenant Commander Torres went first, her flashlight cutting through the blue-lit dimness. The chamber was exactly as the sonar had indicated, walls carved smooth by tools and time, water level carefully maintained, equipment humming. But it was the figure in the center that stopped Torres mid-step. "Jesus Christ," someone whispered behind the camera, the audio later redacted from official reports. Mira hadn't fled to the corners or hidden. She'd remained in the center of the space, vertical in the water, her tail moving with subtle currents to keep her upright. Her head was above the surface, dark hair floating around her shoulders like seaweed, and her eyes, completely black with no visible white or iris, fixed on the intruders with an intelligence that made Torres's training feel suddenly inadequate. Subject appears to be a humanoid aquatic entity. Torres spoke into her recorder, her voice professionally steady despite the tremor in her hand. Upper body consistent with human physiology, though with notable variations in skin coloration and bone structure. Lower body is a piscine tail approximately 6 feet in length. Subject is breathing air, observing our team and displaying obvious signs of higher intelligence. The footage shows Mira tilting her head, studying each person in turn. Then she did something no one expected. She spoke. The sound that emerged was fractured, consonants breaking strangely, vowels held too long or cut too short, but the words were unmistakable. Where? Samuel? Torres's recorder captured the shocked silence that followed. Then, more firmly, Torres replied, Mr. Harrow is upstairs. He's safe. We're not here to hurt you. Hurt, Mira repeated, tasting the word. Saved, Samuel, saved. Above, in Samuel's shack, the fisherman sat at his kitchen table, surrounded by officers, his hands cuffed more as procedure than necessity. Captain Morris, Torres's commanding officer, who'd arrived by helicopter an hour earlier, stood by the window, his face unreadable. How long, Mr. Harrow? Morris asked quietly. 35 years, 4 months, 18 days. And in that time, you never once reported this to authorities? Samuel looked up, his eyes red-rimmed but steady. Would you have? If you'd found something that shouldn't exist, something terrified and hurt, that looked at you like you were its only hope, would you have handed it over to people who'd put it in a tank or cut it open to see how it worked? Morris didn't answer immediately. He was 58, had served in 3 wars, had seen things in the ocean depths during submarine tours that never made it into official logs. He understood the weight of impossible choices. That's not your decision to make, Morris said finally, but his voice lacked conviction. Below, Torres had slowly approached the chamber's edge, kneeling so she was at eye level with Mira. The creature, woman, being, watched her approach without fleeing. Can you understand me? Torres asked. Mira's nod was unmistakable. She raised one hand from the water, pointed at a stack of books on a shelf Samuel had built. Read, Samuel, teach. Torres's mind was racing. This wasn't just a new species. This was proof of an intelligent, non-human civilization living in Earth's oceans. The implications were staggering, world-changing, and she was kneeling 3 feet away from the evidence. Where do you come from? Torres asked. Mira's expression shifted, became distant. When she spoke again, the words came with more confidence, as if muscle memory was returning. Deep, beyond light, beyond warmth, cities in the dark. She paused, searching for words. My people? Below. How many of you are there? Many? Hidden? Always hidden? Why? This time, Mira's laugh was bitter, a sound that somehow translated across species. Because of you. Because we learned, long ago, what happens when humans find us. The words hung in the chamber's still air. Torres thought of the legends, mermaids caught and displayed, creatures from the deep murdered for science or sport, the systematic destruction of anything humanity didn't understand. We're not all like that, Torres said, but even she heard how hollow it sounded. Samuel not like that, Mira replied. Samuel kind, Samuel protect. 35 years. She moved closer to the edge, her hand reaching toward Torres, but not quite touching. What now? What do you do with Mira? It was the question Torres had been dreading. Protocols existed for unknown species, for potential threats, for biological anomalies. But nothing in her training covered sentient beings, thinking, feeling creatures with language and culture and memories. I don't know, Torres admitted, the honesty surprising her. But I promise you, I'll do everything I can to make sure you're treated with dignity, with respect. Respect, Mira echoed, and something in her voice suggested she'd learned what that word meant by its absence. Upstairs, Samuel heard the conversation through the floor, transmitted by some acoustic quirk of the chamber. He closed his eyes, listening to Mira speak with more people than she had in 3 decades. Pride and grief warred in his chest. She deserves to go home, he said suddenly to Morris, to anyone listening. Wherever that is, whatever it takes. She deserves to go home. The facility they took Mira to was off the books, a marine research station on San Clemente Island that officially studied migration patterns and unofficially housed projects too sensitive for mainland eyes. Samuel was brought along partly as a witness, partly as insurance, and partly because Mira refused to cooperate until she saw him. The tank they'd prepared was large, 60 feet in diameter and 40 feet deep, filled with seawater and equipped with every monitoring device the Navy could install on short notice. When they transferred Mira, using a specialized stretcher and half a dozen handlers, Samuel stood at the tank's edge, watching her explore her new environment with movements that were both graceful and heartbreaking. She was used to 15 feet of space. Now she had 60. It should have been better. But prison walls are still prison walls, no matter how far apart. Mr. Harrow, Dr. Elena Martinez approached, clipboard in hand. She was the lead marine biologist assigned to Mira's case, a woman whose reputation for ethical research had made her the compromise candidate between those who wanted to study Mira and those who wanted her protected. "She's been asking for you." "Well, making sounds that her translator program suggests are requests for you." They'd fitted Mira with a device, a waterproof collar with speakers and sensors that analyzed her vocalizations and attempted real-time translation. The technology was experimental, designed for dolphin communication, but it was giving them something resembling conversation. Samuel descended the stairs to the underwater viewing area, a corridor of glass that ran along the tank's side. Mira appeared immediately, pressing herself against the transparent wall, her hand reaching out. "The translator can't be that good yet," Dr. Martinez said from behind Samuel, "but we're getting emotional markers, distress, confusion, and something that registers as longing." Samuel placed his hand on the glass, matching Mira's gesture from the other side. Through the speakers her voice came, processed and strange, but recognizable. "Samuel, they say, going home. True?" "I don't know yet," Samuel admitted. "They're trying to figure out where home is." Behind him, Lieutenant Commander Torres entered the viewing corridor, followed by Captain Morris and two civilians Samuel didn't recognize. Their suits were expensive, their expressions carefully neutral. Government oversight, Samuel guessed, or worse, political interest. "We need to discuss next steps," one of the suits said, a woman with steel-gray hair and eyes like a shark's. "This situation has implications far beyond one individual's fate." "Her name is Mira," Samuel said without turning around. "And she's not a situation. She's a person?" "That's actually one of the central questions," the woman replied. "Legal precedent for personhood is complex. We're in uncharted territory. She speaks, she reads, she thinks. What more do you need?" The debate that followed was one that would be repeated in secured conference rooms and classified briefings over the following weeks. Was Mira legally a person, entitled to rights and protections? Or was she an animal, subject to wildlife regulations? Or something entirely new, requiring legislation that didn't yet exist? While bureaucrats and lawyers argued, Dr. Martinez worked to understand. She spent hours by the tank, asking questions, documenting responses. Mira's intelligence became undeniable. She understood complex concepts, had memories stretching back decades, could describe an entire culture living in the ocean's deepest trenches. "They call themselves the Descent," Mira explained one day, her translated voice coming through speakers around the observation room. "We live where pressure kills, where no light reaches. We build with stone and will. We sing histories. We remember." "How many of you are there?" Dr. Martinez asked, her pen hovering over her notebook. "Many thousands, maybe more. We don't count like you. We measure in songs, many songs of people. And you've stayed hidden all this time?" Mira's expression darkened. "Not always hidden. Once we came to surface. Long ago, humans saw us. Some worshipped, most hunted. We learned, we descended. Now we stay below. Safer." Samuel listened to this from his assigned quarters, a small room adjacent to the facility. They'd given him surprisingly comfortable accommodations, had treated him more as a consultant than a prisoner. But he knew that could change if Mira revealed anything the government deemed a threat. "Tell me about when Samuel found you," Dr. Martinez said another day. "I was young, foolish, came too close to surface, got caught in, don't know word, human trap, could not escape, dying." Mira's hand touched the glass, memory making her movements slow. "Samuel cut me free, could have let me die, Could have told others. He chose different. He chose mercy. Why didn't he let you go? This question had haunted Samuel for 35 years. Now, through speakers and technology, Mira answered it for him. I was hurt. Could not swim. Could not dive deep. Would have died in shallow water. Boats. Nets. Pollution. Samuel knew. He created place. Safe. Hidden. Let me heal. And after you healed? The pause was long. Finally, Mira spoke again. After, I was afraid, and Samuel was not lonely anymore. We needed each other. Wrong, perhaps, but true. The decision, when it finally came, surprised everyone. Not a government mandate or military order, but something resembling consensus. Mira would be returned to the ocean, to depths where she could potentially find her people. But not alone, and not without support. A deep-sea submersible was retrofitted, capable of descending to 20,000 feet. A team was assembled. Torres, Dr. Martinez, 2 Navy divers trained for extreme depths, and Samuel Harrow, who'd refused to be left behind even when they'd insisted he was too old for such a dangerous mission. I kept her for 35 years, he'd said, his voice brooking no argument. I'll see this through to the end. The mission launched on a gray morning in June 2023 from a research vessel positioned over the Cascadia Trench. Mira was transported in a specialized tank, her anxiety obvious in every movement despite the translator's calm rendering of her words. Deep, going deep, she kept repeating. Home, maybe home. The descent took 6 hours. Samuel sat in the cramped submersible, watching through the viewport as blue faded to purple, purple to black. The pressure gauges climbed. Outside, the temperature dropped toward freezing. At certain depths, strange lights flickered, bioluminescent creatures moving through, the dark like underwater stars. Mira was in a separate compartment, sealed and pressurized differently. Through internal cameras, they could see her becoming more animated as they descended, her movements more confident, as if she was remembering something her body had half forgotten. At 18,000 feet, she pressed against the viewport, staring out into the absolute darkness. And then she began to sing. The sound came through the speakers like nothing Samuel had ever heard, low and resonant, a call that seemed to vibrate in his bones. Dr. Martinez checked her instruments, confused. That frequency shouldn't be possible for a human-sized vocal apparatus. She's generating infrasound. She's not human, Torres reminded her quietly. They waited in the dark, the submersible hanging suspended in the crushing depth. Minutes passed, then, impossibly, lights appeared in the distance. Not bioluminescence. These lights were steady, organized, purposeful. Oh my God, one of the divers whispered. The city appeared gradually, like a photograph developing. Structures carved from volcanic rock, lit by some source Samuel couldn't identify. Towers that rose hundreds of feet, bridges spanning chasms he couldn't see the bottom of, and figures, dozens of them, swimming through the streets with the same powerful tail movements Mira used, their bodies adapted for pressure that would crush a human instantly. They're real, Dr. Martinez breathed. They're all real. Mira's song changed, became more urgent, and from the city answers came, voices layering over voices in harmonics that made the submersible's walls hum. She's going to exit the vessel now, Torres said, checking the pressure chamber controls. Mr. Harrow, are you ready to say goodbye? Samuel moved to the internal viewport, looking at Mira one last time through glass and camera. She was looking back, her hand pressed to the barrier. Thank you, the translator said. Mira's words. Samuel, thank you for everything. Be safe, Samuel replied, knowing she probably couldn't hear him. Be happy. The pressure chamber opened. Water flooded in, black and cold and ancient, and Mira swam out into it, her movements sure and swift, heading toward the lights, toward the other figures now swimming up to meet her. Samuel watched her go, watched her embrace what must have been family or friends or something he couldn't understand, watched her turn one last time, raising a hand in farewell. Then she descended further, down toward the city, and was gone. The submersible began its ascent 30 minutes later. Samuel sat in silence the entire 6 hours back to surface, processing what he'd seen, what he'd finally been able to give her. His journal entry that night was simple. She's home. After 35 years, she's home. I don't regret keeping her. I don't regret letting her go. I regret only that it took so long, that I couldn't give her both safety and freedom. But in the end, she got both. That has to be enough. The facility released him 2 weeks later with a stipend, a non-disclosure agreement that seemed almost ceremonial, given what they all now knew, and a letter from Torres. What you did was illegal, she'd written. It violated numerous federal laws and probably a few international treaties, but it was also, in its way, the most human thing I've ever witnessed. You saw something impossible and chose compassion. The world needs more of that, even if we can't officially condone it. Mira asked me to tell you something before she left. The translator struggled with it, but the closest approximation was, "The deep remembers the kind one." I think she means you'll be remembered by her people, by those of us who witnessed this. Take care of yourself, Mr. Harrow. You've earned rest. Samuel returned to Anchor's End, to his shack on stilts, to the chamber beneath it, that now sat empty and dark. He sealed the entrance, filled in the access shaft. Some secrets were meant to stay buried, even after they'd been revealed. He still fishes, though less frequently now, still watches the gray Pacific from his porch. And sometimes, on quiet nights when the fog rolls in thick and the ocean sounds like breathing, he thinks he can hear singing from the deep. Songs that carry meanings he'll never fully understand, in voices that remember an old fisherman who made an impossible choice and spent 35 years living with its consequences. The ocean keeps its secret, but sometimes, Samuel thinks, sometimes the secrets keep us too.